Hello, everyone. This is Brian. Wish I could be there with you personally. When I read these words from Gary, I was excited too. I realized once again, as you realize, that we are all here engaged in something truly significant. Toward that end, I'd like to take a different approach, add another angle to our considerations. This is the 19th century Norwegian composer Edvard Grieg. Looks a little like Mark Twain, I think. Grieg admired another young man of the time, a promising young statesman philosopher named Richard Nordraak. Nordraak, it turns out, died suddenly in his late 20s. Grieg was deeply moved at Nordraak's death and composed an intense, even dramatic musical work to memorialize his friend. It was this very funeral piece, seen here in a simplification transcription, that launched my own graduate research. This work impressed me both as intensely personal and communicative of Grieg's authentic emotion. Many other composers of note, and of notes, plural, have written similar funereal music. This was my working list. Some of these pieces were actually tributes to real individuals, like Grieg's tribute to Nordraak. Other compositions were just fabricated as funeral pieces, whether anyone had actually died or not. Many composers succeed then to an extent at creating genuine sounding, emotionally charged funereal pieces, and all these musical texts, whether real funeral or not, use a common language. The funeral music language is built on a sort of lexicon, and the codes include these categories and examples: certain rhythms, certain melodic gestures, one even sounds like a sigh, certain harmonies that are used commonly. Believe it or not, the choice of a single key is associated with moods or affects related to funeral. Dynamic gestures, such as these drum roll configurations, played actually not by drums, but by the keyboard on the top 2 lines and the strings on the bottom 5 lines. There's sections and structures, just like in linguistically based texts, choice of instruments, and all of this amounts to a sort of code. Now, the Greek topos, or topic, can refer either to a physical, topographical place or a literary place. Something, in either case, that is remembered and revisited, an understood reference point. Leonard Ratner, in a 1980s monograph, sort of codified the topical codes, and his disciples and interlocutors continued that work. Here is an abridged list of musical topoi, topics, drawn from Ratner and one of his students, Kofi Agawu. This is just a short list, there are many more, but it gives you some idea of some of the things that were part of this common language. The notion in the 18th century of musical topics has been neatly summarized by another Ratner disciple. She says the ruling character of each section of music calls for a vocabulary that is easily recognized by the audience. The more specific funeral music stylistic lexicon uses a subset of these codes recognized by people, readily associated with real people's experiences. Yet it is not the theory or the lexicons or the codings per se that pull us in. Instead, it's of greater import that all this contributes to a genuine new communication in the music. As Gary has said of ancient scripture texts, many musical texts also have encoded within them all kinds of things. The signs are snapshots of ideas and wishes on the part of the composer. It's the pursuit of that intention, the composer or the author, that's all important to us. The upshot here is often musical allusions came from an understood sub-language that can be used to communicate to performers and audiences. And it's top-shelf composers who use this language, not just the slouches or the third-tier ones. They use musical gestures to communicate. Whether with music or with linguistically based text, all of this amounts to allusions to things commonly known and experienced, allusions that communicated something. Now, at the risk of further, here is another dead composer. This guy is Guillaume de Machaut. He's a Frenchman of the 14th century, and he's perhaps the first composer known to have amassed and catalogued his own creations for posterity. He appeared to think of himself as an artist, as a composer, and not only as a servant of his royal and aristocratic bosses. Machaut's desire to preserve and his discussion of his own work and his awareness of himself as an individual creator set him apart from the relatively anonymous group of composers that came before him and some around his time. But at least from the 14th century on, it's quite common, even pervasive, that composers desire to be seen as composers, as the musicians they are. Real composers, or real authors, do not typically write so that they can stay anonymous. And dead composers, like dead authors, live through their works, just as Paul lives through his writings. But what can we know about Paul? Just how short or bald or hook-nosed was he, we might wonder, or how cranky or how caffeinated, how maniacal or mild-mannered or Middle Eastern looking. And all that really is interesting to me and to you, I know. But we're actually interested in something more, something deeper, something different. We're interested in Paul's genuine desires, his intentions, and his values. Thinking about the works of the 19th century Grieg or the 14th century Machaut may inform us. We could also extend into the 20th century. We could say something similar about the progressive rock band Kansas, another one of my favorites, in their pre-political correctness advocacy for Native Americans. And all of these composers, authors, can be seen as examples of reaching out to others, jumping off the pages. These are real authors. Well, thank you for thinking about these things with me. I hope the rest of your conversation goes great, and I will hope to monitor some from afar. I'll leave you with these words from Gary.